Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. It's good to be with you. In today's video, I'd like to talk through our strategy for insulating our home. We'll talk about the applications of insulation and what problems we were trying to solve. We'll talk about some of the design decisions that we had to make and what were the main factors kind of contributing to how we ended up in terms of insulating our house. And we'll talk about the kind of the particulars, the products that we used, and whether or not they were effective. Let's first talk about the two main things that we're hoping to accomplish with our insulation. The first one is sound. We're trying to kind of deaden the space, or we're trying to make spaces so that they don't transmit sound from one space to another. Applications there will be things like our ceiling joists from the upstairs to the downstairs, and some of the interior walls that we insulated. And that's just trying to keep, if the kids are in their room listening to music, or we have a media room, a room that we hope to make into a theater. So we definitely wanted to insulate those walls so that it's people can kind of listen to a movie a little bit louder and it's not being disruptive to the people next door. The second main application is to try to keep hot air outside and cold air inside and kind of slow down the transfer of heat or energy from one side of the house or walls and assemblies to the other side. So in the wintertime, that's going to mean trying to keep the house warm and comfortable. And in the summertime, for us here in Central Florida, which is predominantly our longest season, we're trying to keep the house cool inside and keep a lot of the hot air outside. The three main types of heat transfer are convection, conduction, and radiant. So we'll talk about kind of what each one of those are. I drew up a little mock-up here of a sketch, so we'll kind of use that to try to illustrate that, and we'll talk through those three different types. If you're already familiar with that, definitely skip ahead in the video, and you can kind of go to some of the applications. But if you're interested in kind of learning more about what we were trying to contend with and how we did it, it's good to understand what those basic principles are for heat transfer. So of those three, let's talk about convection first. Convection is a lot more about transferring energy via air. So if I leave a window open in my house, or I leave the door open in my house, the warm air from outside comes in, mixes with the cool air inside, makes the cool air inside warmer, and then the inside of the house becomes warm. The best way to handle that is to make sure that you're sealing up any of the penetrations that are going through the wall. Things like electrical wires that go to exterior outlets. Any kind of penetration through a wall, you want to seal that up. Other areas are leaky windows, leaky doors. You'll notice your doors have gaskets to try to help prevent that air from coming into the house and prevent your cool air from leaking out. So you're really kind of looking for air sealing when you're trying to slow down that convection aspect of heat transfer. The second main type we'll talk about is conduction, and that's something being hot in contact with something that is not as hot, and the transfer of the heat from the hot item to the thing that's not as hot. Now those two things want to kind of equalize. This is similar to putting a pan on one of those old school ovens or stove tops that have like kind of the wire coils that you used to set them on. And so that is, the heat source itself is in direct contact with that pan, and it's going to heat up that pan until eventually the pan is the same temperature as the burner or the element. The third main type is radiant heat. That's essentially something that's extremely hot that isn't necessarily in contact with another object, but it's radiating that heat or transferring that heat by way of radiation. The one main component in your house that's trying to prevent that are low-E windows that maybe have a tint on them. So the sun is coming through the window, hitting the floor of your house and heating up the floor of your house, thus heating up the space inside. And so for us, we'll talk about the system that we use to try to address radiant heat. So let's talk about our particular assembly. We're going to start with the roof assembly. The outermost layer of our roof is a metal panel. And so the sun will come down, hit that metal panel, and it does actually, we use the light color panel, and that's going to reflect some of the heat away. Underneath that, we put the metal panels mounted to furring, and then sheathing underneath that, and then we have our roof purlins. That creates a dead air space between the metal panel and the sheathing of the roof. And the intent there is to try to reduce the amount of heat that is conducted from the metal panel into the interior of the house. Underneath that dead air space, we installed a radiant barrier underlayment. That's kind of a foil product that we'll talk about here in a minute. And that's going to help as the panel gets hot, it's going to try to radiate that heat or reflect that heat back out. Now ultimately, through things like thermal bridging, through the fact that this space inside here just ends up heating up and getting hotter, ultimately the sheathing does in fact heat up, and at that point it's trying to heat the inside of the house. The next component we have is our mineral wool insulation, and that's kind of helping slow down the transfer of that heat from the sheathing into the interior of the house. In the wintertime, this is effectively our blanket. The house is warm inside, and we're trying to keep that warm air inside the house, and so it's like putting a big blanket on in wintertime. The last layer underneath that for us is going to be foam board insulation. That for us is going to accomplish two things. It's going to help hold the insulation in place. If this insulation tends to want to start to sag out of those bays, the foam board will hold it up in place. We also intend to tape that foam board insulation, and that will help air seal, and that'll help with some of that convection, the convection heat that's going to transfer inside the house. Now, an important note here, this is different from what our original intent was. The main driver for us winding up with this system was cost. We had originally intended to use spray foam insulation to the underside of the sheathing. Our quote for that was for 2 inches, which wouldn't achieve our value. We needed at least an R30 underneath the roof assembly. 2 inches wouldn't achieve that, and just 2 inches of it. And then if we were to do what's called flash and bat, so we flash spray foam, that air seals, gives us 2 inches, and then after that we'd still have to buy mineral wool insulation. The spray foam itself alone, our quotes came in around $20,000. That was cost prohibitive for us. On top of that, we would still have to buy mineral wool insulation. We ultimately ended up buying all of the insulation for the house. The ceiling or the roof, the underside of the roof, the exterior envelope of the walls, we got R23, R30 for the roof, and then we bought interior insulation as well, and insulation to do our floor joists everywhere that was. Our total cost for insulation is around $20,000. And so we went from maybe being somewhere around I guess, say maybe $40,000 to $20,000. The other main factor here is that we can install all of this assembly. We can install the mineral wool insulation, and there's a huge labor cost to the spray foam installation itself. It's something we couldn't do ourselves, and that would have contributed to our overall cost. So this is the radiant barrier underlayment product that we talked about in our assembly for the roof. It's on the back side of it, it has kind of a cloth type material, and it is breathable. On the front side of it, or on the side that goes out, it's kind of a shiny, foily type material. And this goes on the sheathing, on the outside roof of the sheathing, and that's what kind of reflects some of the temperatures. So because I'm pretty nerdy, I decided that while I was installing it in the summertime, I would take some temperatures with an infrared thermometer. So it was about anywhere from like 96 to 98 degrees outside. That would be the ambient air temperature. I took the readings around maybe like 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun was directly overhead. This would be just the sheathing was installed at the time. The temperatures on the underside of the sheathing at that point in time was between 113 and 118 degrees. So that's how hot the wood itself was on the underside. Much hotter on the outside, actually. Panel temps were 125 to 130 degrees at that time. I put a piece of metal panel out in the yard and took a temperature of that. And then after, I actually installed it, and then 2 days later I took temperatures again, and they were between 100 to 102 degrees. And so we kind of pulled down at least 10 degrees from that. If you consider what it went from, if the panel is 130 degrees, we ultimately wound up at about 100 degrees. So between the panel, the dead air space, the radiant barrier underlayment, we're probably dropping our temps from about 130 degrees to 100 degrees. Now this is the material that we used in the underside of the sheathing in the roof. And so as that heat's making its way into the house, or like I mentioned, we want to try to keep heat that's in the house from escaping into the outdoors. So this is the product we use to do this. This is going to be an R30 mineral wool insulation. Now it's made for 24-inch wood studs, similar to how the walls are. So we had to fill the cavity of the stud so that it would work out, because it's not actually a full 24-inch wide bat. They account for there being wood in between that bay, and so we just filled it in with strips that we would cut, and then we would install this, and then it would snug fit in. We've talked about a number of challenges that we have given the system that we installed, our pre-engineered steel home. I mentioned about using our purlins are this 6-inch stud. We had to kind of compress or pack this in there. And if you think about us putting the foam board insulation on the underside of this installation here, we had to add one more thing, and it's this. We cut 2x4s in half and we screw them to the underside of the purlins. And what that allows us to do is to screw the foam board to this. It gives us about 7.5 inches or so of spacing here. The R30 insulation fits an 8-inch cavity, and so that kind of gives us the spacing that we needed for that insulation. Plus, it gives us an easy material to screw, just like a lath screw with a fender washer on it, to secure our foam insulation to the underside of this wood, or the wood furring strip. So let's talk about our wall assembly. On the outside of the house, we used an insulated vinyl siding. So it's a product looks like this. It's got a foam backing on it, and that does provide some level of insulation. For us, the decision probably was less about insulating it, but more about how durable the product is. You can tell it's actually a lot stiffer when it has that foam backing and that adhesive to it. So it was easier to install. And since we have hurricanes, I was worried about it. A lot of times when we get a storm come through and there's a lot of wind, you'll see the people's vinyl siding gets blown off of the house. I hoped that being a little more rigid would help it stay on the house. So on the inside of our exterior walls, or the outer envelope of the building, code is I think R13 to R15, somewhere in there. But since we had a 6-inch cavity here, we filled it with R23. So a little bit over on our wall insulation, and that should give us a little bit better, actually more than anything in our case, is probably going to help keep warm air in the winter. Most of our house, the downstairs has a kind of a wrapping porch, and that keeps the walls shaded pretty well. And the way that our house is oriented, the longest walls that we have are on the east and the west, and so we really only get sun on a wall for about half of a day. It's obviously going to help with ambient temperature when it's 98 degrees. It takes kind of a period of time for that heat to transfer into the house. This will slow it down quite a bit. And so that's kind of the idea, is if we can slow that process down as the sun comes up over, breaks the ridge of the roof, starts to work its way down the other side. And so this, for example, is our west wall. And we're filming this in the morning. So this wall right now is fairly cool because there's no sun hitting it. Now our system, or assembly, uses metal studs for our wall girts, and they're a shape, kind of like a C shape, and they have this void in the middle of them. You can buy mineral wool insulation for commercial application. It was actually a lot more expensive, and they don't produce as much of it. And so at the time that we were trying to purchase insulation, there wasn't any, and we'd have to wait 6 months to a year potentially for it. So instead, we opted to use an insulation that would be more typical of a residential application. That would be inside of wood walls. And so this is an example. I don't have any more of the wall insulation because we've actually installed all of that. But I have this as a good example here, and it's made for 24-inch wood application, which means the bat itself is 23 inches wide. So we had to solve a problem. The space from the back leg of this stud to the inside of that stud is going to be 24 inches, a full 24 inches, so we're about an inch shy. And so what we did is we took some of the R23 insulation, it's about 5.5 inches. We cut 2-inch wide strips. They fit inside the metal stud just like this. And that way, when we installed the insulation into the wall, it would fit snug. As it went in, it would kind of fill that gap, and it would kind of snug fit or pressure fit into the wall. And that's what holds it in place. You can tell it's kind of a rigid product, and by way of slightly compressing it and putting it into the space, that's what makes it stay. So we talked a lot about heat transfer in the house and how we've been trying to prevent that. Let's talk a little bit about the sound aspect. One of the main factors for us, we have a wood floor upstairs and we have wooden floor joists. If you've ever been in a house that isn't well insulated, every time somebody's walking around up there, kids are running around, jumping up there, it's extremely loud. So there's a lot of sound transfer from upstairs to downstairs. Now there are some amazing methods for reducing a lot of that sound, but a lot of those are very expensive. So again, cost being a main driver for us on how we wanted to address that, we chose to mostly dampen that sound. And so we use this product here. This is still mineral wool insulation, but you'll notice it's a 16-inch wide. That's the size of our floor joists, are 16 inches on center, and they are in fact wood. So this one we didn't have to do any modifications like we had to do when we had metal stud applications. And this basically stuffs into the cavity in between the wooden floor joists and between the upstairs and downstairs. I don't know if this is going to matter for anyone else, but in our joists we have a lot of wires that pass through that. There's a lot of things in the way there, and we knew we were going to have to cut around that. You can try it. Those are 2x10s, I believe, or 2x12s in those joists, and that's a big space. It's pretty expensive to buy this stuff in the larger R values, and it was actually difficult to find a 16-inch that would kind of fit this application. So we actually decided just to double, go with more of a 2x4, which is an R15, and we actually just have to put 2 layers into that. It worked out pretty well because everywhere that we have wires passing through those joists, we slide one piece up and then we stick the other piece and we just sandwich those wires together. Now this doesn't fill the space entirely, but the product itself kind of stuffs between there, and it takes a lot of the vibration noise that you would hear, and it also takes kind of the sound transmission. If somebody's talking or saying anything up there, you really can't hear it coming through the floor. But if somebody does jump, it's loud enough that you still hear that. And we have one more thing to address that, but it isn't necessarily insulation related. Underneath any place where we don't have a suspended ceiling, we're going to put resilient channel, and that's a way to isolate the vibration from those floor joists to the drywall underneath. So the goal, hopefully, is that through the resilient channel, through a lot of this mineral wool that's kind of tucked into those spaces, that will deaden a lot of the sound transfer from upstairs downstairs. So hopefully today's video was informative or entertaining, or hopefully both, as we talked through a lot of the decisions we had to make, the things that kind of drove those decisions, and how we addressed a lot of the circumstances that our unique application presented, and how we addressed things like heat transfer, both conduction, convection, radiant. I don't know if all of this is going to work. We haven't really finished all of these assemblies. I look forward to seeing whether or not it does help us keep our energy bills down. But these are the things that we've chosen to make an investment in as we've been building this house, so that we can actually save some money in the long term. Well, thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you on the next one.